maybe it happens more in the teenage years, or maybe it could be later. I suppose it all depends on where you are in your faith, but there are times that I know when I was younger that if you did have a kind of a question about, like, is this all true or is it not, you might feel that like it's a bad thing to actually question it. And you might feel, oh, I'm offending God by questioning something, or, I better stop questioning it, or it's wrong to question it. Maybe it's a fear that the answer doesn't exist.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's it. It often comes from a lack of confidence in the truth of our faith. And when we're insecure in our faith, then we don't want to ask any questions, and we'll shut down questions. But when we're confident in our faith, we're able to say, okay, I have a difficulty here. I'm going to bring it to prayer. I'm going to bring it to the scriptures. I'm going to open the catechism. I'm going to ask some friends. I'm going to ask a priest. I'm going to go online and see if there are answers. And that kind of confident searching for the truth, knowing that the truth will reveal itself to us. And there's actually, I think the best example of that are people like Thomas Aquinas and Albert the Great. Thomas Aquinas, he lived in an age of faith. Everybody around them, pretty much, they were believing Christians. Does that mean he refused to ask questions? No, he spent his entire life asking questions. Within faith, he found himself asking more and more and more questions. Faith wasn't a limit to his questions. It was like the basis, the kind of the arena for all of his questioning, all of his thinking and analyzing and rethinking. And I think they're really good role models for us.
And so when we hear of the mystery of God, sometimes people might just say, well, it's just a mystery, so might as well just give up. But really, the mystery means we can keep finding out, but we will never be able to find it all out because we're finite and he's infinite. But
exactly,
we can always keep learning more and more.
Exactly. So it's not like that God is somehow in the dark and so we can't see him. It's that there's too much light for us to see. Maybe that's a better way to see it. There's almost too much there for us to understand. But I think sometimes we think that only religious people use words like mystery. But I mean, even in science, we speak of the mystery of the world. And when we say that the world is a mystery to us, we don't think that's an end to our questioning. We think precisely the opposite. Because the world is a mystery, I'm going to be intrigued by the world, and I'm going to say, oh, how does that work? How does this work? And I think it's the same in our faith. We have these mysteries. Now, the mystery of God is different because our minds are made to be able to figure out how the world works. Our minds are not made to be able to figure out how God works, because God is utterly simple. He's not composed of parts. We can't take him apart like we would take apart a rose or something to figure out how a rose works. But having said that, there's something kind of analogous there, that the mystery of God is an invitation to ask more questions about God in the hope of understanding more and more.
Okay, and then, like you say, there's no parts, but there are parts to things here. But by possibly investigating parts here, we may actually discover about who created them.
Well, you've just hit on such an important topic. Throughout Christian history, the idea of the world as revealing God. And it's there, I mean, already St. Paul, in the first chapter of his letter to the Romans, he talks about how the world reveals God to people, that we should know that God exists just by looking at the world around us. So we have no excuse to say that there's no God, he's saying, because just look at the world around you. I mean, it's just so evident. And then in other parts of the Bible as well, it talks about how the heavens reveal the glory of God and so on. And often Christian thinkers will compare the world to a book. There's this idea of the Liber Mundi, the book of the world. And so just to give you one example, an Irish philosopher and theologian, John Scotus Eriugena, he says that, every creature is like a word spoken by God, and that we can look at any creature and understand something of God just by looking at the creature. We can see that there's something of God's goodness, of his wisdom, in everything that he has made. And then when you put the whole thing together, you just see this extraordinary mind, this extraordinary wisdom and generosity and fertility that speaks to us of a God. If God is beyond all this, superior to all of this, it just creates an enormous sense of wonder. And actually, just a final example there, Albert the Great, who we'll be talking about, Albert the Great actually says that even the intestines of worms are worthy of our study because they reveal something of the mind of the divine artist. So just even when you're looking, you could be dissecting a worm. A lot of us did it in school, you dissect the worm and you're looking at all the different parts. And Albert the Great has said, this reveals the glory of God. Whether you're going really, really small or really, really big and looking at the universe, and it's enormous empty spaces, and like in either direction, you're filled with wonder. And I think it's so important that as Christians, we don't only think that only the Bible reveals to us who God is. Everything reveals to us who God is.
Yeah. So if we look at the second part of that, religion can purify science from idolatry and false absolutes. Is there probably a part of science that, we get so caught up in results and things like that? Is there a part of science where we should then just take those results, and there's a bit of maybe meditating to be done on it to meditate the creator?
Yeah. Oh, I think so. And I think, so often there's this phrase, scientism, and Bishop Robert Barron speaks really eloquently about it. It's the idea that science somehow, exclusively of all other ways of knowing the world, it just like pushes them all to one side, and that science, the natural sciences, are like the only way to really understand anything at all. And that's, I think, the idolatry that's being spoken about there. And very often you do get that attitude when you hear people saying things like, listen to the scientists. And you kind of think, well, anybody who's actually really done science and practiced science or studied it to a high level will know that scientists don't see themselves as oracles. They think the scientific method can be trusted, but it's a method which involves a lot of fallibility along the way. And scientists, more than anyone, I think they're aware of the potential for error, which is why they have so much kind of peer review and self-correction and controls in their experiments and all that kind of stuff. So this idea of just listen to the scientists are like gurus, they have all the answers, they have all the truth. That's actually a kind of an unscientific attitude, I think. But it's very, very widespread. But I think you're absolutely right to say that we don't just need to change the scientific method. It's not so much that the scientific method itself is the problem. It's more our attitude to it as a whole and our lifestyle around it. And C.S. Lewis actually wrote a really, really good passage on this in The Abolition of Man. He says science was born in the wrong era. Science, kind of modern science, really, he says it has its roots in a time when humans were thinking of themselves as like the masters of creation and just dominating the world. And he names the thinker Francis Bacon as an example of this. And he says that science maybe needs to repent of this kind of attitude of just controlling the world, mastering everything, and instead have a more contemplative attitude to the world. And I really think, a really interesting example, the Steiner schools, I know they're controversial, but kind of forms of education that bring children and science students and whoever it might be, just into kind of contemplative contact with the world, just to go into nature and just to spend time there, to actually look up at the stars, to be amazed at a rock that you pick up on the beach, just to let yourself be amazed at it. And I think those kind of contemplative moments, they do so much to make science healthy, I suppose.
Right, because it's a funny one, when you talk about being able to learn from say, and of course we can come along and look at, we can look at a dove and we can say, oh yeah, it's easy, this peaceful kind of thing. Yeah. But I suppose like sometimes there can be, the not so beautiful kind of thing. Like I remember one time listening to someone talking about rats, and I was thinking, but then, there's an intelligence there, with the rat and so on. And then, we can learn a lot about it. But then I was actually reading something one time that if all of the rats were taken out of the sewers in London, I think that the city, that the population basically would be wiped out in a matter of, I think it was weeks or something. And it was basically that they're like sponges for disease and they keep disease down, but these diseases would rise. And okay, obviously I don't know what, there's probably vaccinations now for a lot of this stuff, but the point is still that there are things, I suppose, that we might look at things and say, like what could we learn from God about that? But I suppose there are things that in some of these creatures that we still don't know. I'm struck by, I think it was David Attenborough that was talking about that little, he was saying that the reason he couldn't believe in God through creation was because of, the thing that eats out the eye of the children and whatever.
Yeah.
But I was speaking about that to another Dominican priest, Father Philip Mulrine, and as Father Philip responded, well, that he said that David Attenborough said that that's the only purpose that little creature has. But he said that we know of, but we don't know yet, what other purpose this thing may have. So it's, I suppose, like that there are deeper purposes for some of the things that we can't actually figure out yet.
Sure. So to have a certain humility, I think, is important. I think there are kind of there's an extreme that we should avoid, and you actually see it in the 18th century and maybe early 19th century thinkers, Christian thinkers, who say it's just so obvious that God exists because the natural world is so harmonious, everybody gets along, everything is just perfect. And actually, because they were kind of naively describing the natural world as just this mechanism, like William Paley talks about the world being like a watch, just everything works perfectly together. And because they presented this kind of naive perspective, when people find elements that don't fit or that seem more vicious or savage, people talk about nature red and tooth and claw, kind of things that are really just like going for each other. Then their faith is actually weakened because it's been built on that naive view. And I think as Catholics, we'd actually want to say two things: that the world is ordered and good, and that the world is fallen. Both of those things. That the world is beautiful and broken. And so we're able to discern order and beauty and goodness in the world, and we're able to discern brokenness and fallenness, including in the natural world. So as to how we exactly explain how that came to be, I mean, a literal reading of Genesis would say that it began with the fall of man, but maybe we might talk about that later on in the series, about other ways that Christians might understand that. But basically, that our perspective on the world, it's not that naive idea that the natural world is just perfectly ordered and harmonious. We do believe that there has been a fall and that things are broken, but not so broken that we can't see the glory of God within it all.
If you liked what you just saw and would like to see the full interview, click on the Watch More box above, or else click on the link in the description box below. Make sure to also click on the subscribe button above so as to receive more regular content. Thank you.